Welcome to IT Mastermind Talks, your access to insights and experiences from thought leaders in the IT services industry and those that support the industry. Our podcast features not only the seasoned professionals charting their start to exit journey, but also the key contributors who help ensure their success. We delve into the diverse challenges encountered within the IT services realm, encompassing both professional hurdles and personal obstacles. Join us, be part of our growing community, and engage in the conversation. Hosted by Ian Markram of LoadingGrowth.
Hi, good morning. I've got Matthew Brown from Datalink, and he's been working with me for a while. I enjoy his company. He challenges me, and he's got a great position in the market. And we're going to have a great conversation today. I know it. So welcome aboard, Matthew. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. It's been great working with you since we first met for a steak, mate. It's
Steak
back
and wine.
in Melbourne, and yeah, steak and wine, and we've been sort of chatting ever since. So.
Great. Well, we're gonna go through your journey today, and we're gonna see where you're at with things. And then what we want to do is over the next year or two, we'll call you back on the podcast, and you can give us an update on your journey. And this is what's really about this podcast: is to show people and how easy it is to become an IT services business owner or a software owner company, and with different tips and tricks how to get there. And we're going to take that journey with you through that process. So I'm quite excited. When we start with our guests, we start really at the background, right at the beginning of their journey. And, you know, it's amazing when you go through this, Matt, because so many people have had different journeys to start their entrepreneurship and started out earning their stripes doing different things. Can you go back to right at the beginning? You know, you're finishing high school. Where from there?
Yeah, well, mate, that's quite a way back now.
It is.
Probably doesn't look it, but it's definitely a while, a few decades. Yeah. So look, for me, I finished high school, and literally when I was doing the exams, I was applying for jobs. I knew that university was going to be a delayed one for me, and I sort of postponed it for a year. As a gap year, say, was probably what I was looking at doing. And that obviously never really happened in the end, but I ended up literally finding a job the week I finished my last exam. I started at Repco the next week, and ultimately ended up in the head office there just ordering stock. So it wasn't a particularly fun or challenging job. You know, it was quite mundane and probably quite boring. But it definitely got me starting in my first of the journey of my career. So I'm definitely thankful for that.
Brilliant.
I was told back then, like a lot of people who were applying for the job, they turned up in a t-shirt and shorts, and they just assumed that it was Repco, and being a car place, and I think I was the only one that turned up in a tie, I think. But so it wasn't a particularly hard job to get either, if I'm being honest.
All right. So first job, you didn't go and study. You decided to jump straight into earning cash, and nothing wrong with that. Cash is king. So talk us a bit about after Repco, or what happened there.
Yeah, so during my time at Repco, one of the things that I did manage to do there was this is back in the fax machine days. Email had just started penetrating the market, and a lot of orders that we were placing weren't always being received by suppliers. So they'd either have these dodgy printouts, couldn't read them, and no one would tell us at that point. So you'd wait 2 weeks for these orders to rock up at the DC, and nothing would happen. So one of the things that I did when I was there was build an order confirmation system. So I was doing like data extraction processes from old AS400 environment and an Access database back then. And that really sort of like started to earn piqued my interest in databases and analytics. So that eventually my next role that I landed went to Sigma Pharmaceuticals. So I ended up becoming a merchandise analyst and started doing a whole bunch of reporting and code and started learning Cognos back in the day. So it was a bit of a journey there.
Yeah, look, Cognos, Pharmaceuticals. I did some work at Pharmaceuticals, Bayer Pharmaceuticals, and Cognos. We used to compete with Cognos, so I know it really, really well. It was a great tool at its peak, a weapon of a planning and reporting solution. So but anyway, let's carry on. So you got involved in those tools?
Yeah, got involved in the tools. Got involved in sort of cubes and VBA macros and things like that. I got a lot more heavily involved in the database sort of design and development. And it ultimately ended up becoming the group BI manager. So probably within about 3 years, from merchandise analyst role to group BI manager of $1 billion company at sort of age 25, 26. just sort of worked my way through the tools and I was really, really dedicated to learning. So whilst I didn't do uni at that point, I'd done 5 or 6 different courses in Cognos and admin and Visual Basic, macro writing and things like that, SQL Server, running SQL queries, things like that. I do a lot of training in that space to the point where then I get really good and I started doing data modeling, sort of progressed up to be a manager at that team and leading 4 or 5 people at that point in time across the 2 different sites there. So they had a manufacturing team and a sort of retail wholesale team and sort of doing the analytics across those 2 environments. So
Great.
Yeah, just learned on the job basically.
So learning on the job, it's a big trait with a lot of the owners that I've coached over the last sort of 10 years is that they've actually had to re-educate and keep on educating themselves. There's so many things have changed, not even the technology side of it, but running a business, things have changed quite a bit. Legislation around staff, cross boundaries with, other states or countries have changed quite a bit. And I know you keep on updating yourself as you go through. Is there a point in time, Matt, that you think you know enough that you don't have to learn anymore? What do you think he's going to carry on learning your whole life?
No, I honestly don't think there is. I spend a lot of time these days. I actually physically pay for mentoring and things like that because I value it so highly. I think you need to do these things. There's always weak spots in everyone's career path and also their own personalities and so forth. I think there's always things you can work on and improve and get better at. And when you master something, then there's always something else to go and master.
Yeah,
and get better at and learn more about.
Sure, for sure. I think it's a journey, and the older I get, I realize, there's still a lot of things you can still learn in practice, not just around the tech side, but actually managing and being a leader within a business. So that's great that you're paying for mentorship. It's great that you keep on improving yourself, and it's important to do so. So let's go back to Sigma. You're finishing off in Sigma. You're sort of the BI manager. It's a pharmaceutical, a lot of challenges, a lot of regulations around pharmaceuticals. Can you just give people a bit of an insight into that if you can remember? That's quite a way back.
Yeah, no, I can certainly remember parts of it. That's for sure. But there's a lot of things in pharma that you need to really be careful of. There's Schedule 8 drugs and there's different things, the way you got to store them and transport them and so forth. Obviously, theft and those sorts of things are very sought after, I guess, by criminals and so forth. They're acquiring drugs that can be cut and used on the black market there. So there's definitely certain controls and regulations around this stuff. And there are some of those things that are very quite toxic sort of drugs as well. So you've got to be very careful with all those sorts of processes. So there's definitely an element of that being wholesaling. Probably one of the challenges was really keeping up with the volume of different systems. Back then, it was bespoke systems for everything. There wasn't really a clear ERP system. There was 6 different state-based ERPs that were being used. So you can imagine, and they also had a lot of limitations around them. So 6-character limits on invoices, numbers, and things like that. So we certainly had to loop around some things, and you had to consider time, not just the document identifier, but time as well, to be part of the identification process and the state. So there was things like that definitely added to the challenge back then.
Yeah, it's good. So you learned. It sounds like the challenge kept you, involved, kept you sort of ingrained and learning and what you can do with BI or analytics in those days. I've forgotten what exactly you called it. It's changed slightly. So how did it go from Sigma into the next role?
Yeah, good question. Interesting, because I hadn't finished uni at that point. I hadn't even started really uni at that point.
Okay.
So I decided that I probably around that sort of age, maybe about a year before I left Sigma, give or take, I actually decided to go back to uni. And I had the privilege of doing 4 days a week. So I managed to the first year of uni doing part-time only. So it was sort of 2 subjects a semester. I got really lucky and the actual courses are lined up on the same day. So I was able to take a day off on like a Friday or something it was. I can't remember exactly what day, but let's say a Friday. And I had 4 days where I'd work extra hard. I'd do the sort of 40 plus hours, in those 4 days, be available for support if I needed it, but ultimately having a day just dedicated to going to uni and being in the workforce at that point, 4 or 5 years, I found it quite simple. A lot of uni guys, I think, and girls going into that sort of environment, the workload increases a lot more than high school, and they probably weren't used to it. I was used to doing a full 40 plus hours a week, and therefore I just felt quite straightforward to go to uni for a day straight and just learn,
Yeah.
So I did that for a year and it worked out really well. But then unfortunately the second year, heading into it, I was in the meeting and missed the allocation of courses. I couldn't pick the courses that I wanted. I had a time here and a day, another day, and it was really quite messy. So I had to completely step it down to one subject. And I knew that at that point it was going to be almost impossible to finish in any reasonable time,
Yeah.
So at that same time, I decided, okay, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I started doing some consulting work. I really wanted to experiment if I could actually do some consulting. So I asked and got the blessing of doing that consulting work for that day a week.
Mm-hmm.
But I was already doing the with, and ultimately started doing some consulting. In the background, I also learned I did a diploma in screen. So basically, I'm a digital artist by qualification, I guess you'd say. In the end, but that was also because back in the day, those Shrek movies and things like that, I was quite interested in how they all sort of hung together. Did a bit of that just for some fun.
Yeah.
And then, so ultimately the consulting started becoming like, okay, Matt, you're doing a day a week with us. The customers I was working with were like, Matt, we can't do 1 day a week. We're just not getting the output done. And would you be interested in coming over full time? So I took the leap and left the stability of a full-time role to go out and consult. And that was on an hourly rate. So you can imagine going from a stable position where I've went all the way up to something where it's completely.
Are you married at the stage, Matt, or are you still?
I wasn't.
Single?
No.
Yeah. So not a family to worry about the overheads and expenses.
Yeah. I was still quite long, mid-20s sort of thing, and still able to pivot if I needed to. So it was sort of my thought process, and I thought, if I can do 3 or 4 days a week and get roughly the same amount of cash, then I'll probably be in a safe spot. So that's sort of where I did it and left. And then for the next probably 20 years, I ultimately ended up there for quite some time and consulted a whole different range of business, probably 30 or 40 businesses over that time. Did all sorts of projects. So it really just one thing led to another. Got more exposure. I kept on doing the training. I got to lead more of a team. And so I learned realistically on the job more than I did anything. So from managing staff at 24, 25, 26, having to let them go, having to bring them on, so it was quite a young age when I was doing that, and then just progressed from there. So
great. So when you're at the 4 days a week at Sigma and you're moving into the consulting world, what gave you the thought that you could do that? Did you see someone else consulting at Sigma and you went, that guy's doing that, why can't I do something similar? Or did you have a friend? Or how did you know about consulting or contracting or whatever you want to call it at that stage? How did you actually, gave you the idea and then want to copy them, I presume? Is that what happened?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I saw some people consulting with us, building warehouses and using Cognos and so forth. And I'm already doing this alongside them, more or less, and I'm learning and I'm constantly improving. I thought to myself, I can certainly do this. And then seeing them do that and having that slow that transition phase where I had a day a week where it didn't fully jump, but I could actually then deliver to other customers, not just in a role that I'd been, working with for a little while. I didn't know the company, and it was a completely different industry, and getting some real wins where the customers practically begging me to come over. I thought, okay, this is something I feel quite drawn to, and knew that at that point that I had probably the skill sets and the acumen and the drive to do it. So why not give it a crack? And I'm probably young enough that it's worth taking the risks.
Yeah, you normally got to see someone do it actually to believe it. It's quite interesting. I mean, the same as me, a lot of things I've learned or to do or not to do is through watching other people do them on a project or on a client site or in an engagement, whatever it is, over the last 20, 25 years. And then the first sort of 10 years are very informative of consulting. I worked at Deloitte. I saw what was good, not good. And then I went to a company called Axon, and then I came over from the UK into Australia. And it is quite interesting with those consultancy firms when you're working alongside them. Often you think, well, hang on, I can do this better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And off you go, and that just gives you the permission to become a consultant. So that's awesome that happened. So were you just focused at that stage, at the early stage, just in the Cognos world, or did you branch into other sort of data warehousing technologies?
Yeah, so the back end of Cognos, if you remember, it wasn't great. You had to have a really well supported data warehouse in the background to make it performant, and so I really got heavily into SQL Server at that time. Way back in high school, I'd done a whole bunch of database work, and I'd done the database work in Repco, but not to the degree that was enterprise level, database and modeling and so forth. And I got into that through the Cognos environment. And ended up becoming quite good at data modeling and database tuning and development in a database. And just progressed from there. So it was really in conjunction with starting through an analytical background first, but then as I as it progressed, knowing that the back end was really where the power was, learning SQL, learning how to tune things, learning how to model things correctly, leaning on the consultants, leaning on additional training outside. YouTube wasn't really much of a thing, back then. It was all massive 600, 700 page textbooks that you have to read and go to training courses. And that was the whole premise. There was no real free content. So it was a lot harder to learn, and you have to really watch a lot of people, watch a lot of different people do things.
Yeah, I remember when I was learning in those days, or right at the beginning of my sort of time, is I would actually take some of the literature to work and work through the problems and go through the literature with actually it helped me learn, forced me to learn, to solve a problem where I didn't want to sit on the weekend and just read stuff. I wanted to actually put it into practice, and then it forces you. And that's, I think, is the best way to this day. So I think that's where I got accelerated learning, was the force of trying to solve problems all the time. So it sounds like you did the same thing. I only wish if we had YouTube back then, how life would be so different and so much easier.
I'll look back on my career and there's 2 or 3 things that I wish, like, if we had today back then. One is access to YouTube for content, obviously technically to learn things quicker. ChatGPT, obviously another one. When those concepts weren't even on the horizon at that point. But and then I think 3, again, YouTube, but probably from the context of mentorship and business. The sheer access you have to information way beyond your sphere of influence now is so vast. That's something I really wish I had. Through that journey, because the only way you could get more experience was to physically work with the people. If you got really lucky, you'd work with some amazing people or some really amazing clients that would happy to take you on a journey for some new technology and take the risk along with you to deploy these technologies. If you didn't get lucky enough for that, you were kind of a bit stuck, really. It was definitely a different environment. So
yeah. So when you started at your consultancy environment, basically as a contractor, I think, by the sounds of things, did you have a vision for the company or where you wanted to go? Or you just said, hang on, I just want to get billable 3-4 days a week, as you said, and make some cash and then potentially study, or we'll just keep on learning? Did you have a vision at that stage, or just jump into it?
Early on, I didn't. I always knew I wanted to do bigger and better things. Like that was always a background. I feel like I had this calling to do something really amazing. But when I first started, it was more just like, I'm young, I'm riding dirt bikes on the weekend. I didn't go out and party really much, but I definitely did risky things like dirt bike riding on tracks and those sort of things. I was enjoying that sort of life, and then basketball and that sorts of things. And then it really just worked. So I ended up going in there and thinking that, hey, this could be something I can do. It's going to give me a lifestyle I'm going to be quite happy with. And then probably within about 5 years, I just got the natural tendency to start to seeing chaos in a process or a environment and wanting to build systems around it and fix it and really lead through doing and showing others how to do that exact thing or rebuild something. So naturally started to lean into taking on bigger and bigger projects, starting to lead those projects, help with the scope of works and so forth, help project management. And it got to a point where obviously I must have been not too bad at it because I got invited to become a partner and so forth in the company, and sort of work through that. So, it did ultimately lead to that way, but it wasn't like strategically I was thinking, I'm 25, this is where I want to be in 10 years time, and let's go for this path. It was just sort of happened, I guess you'd say.
For sure. No, that's all good. A lot of people don't really think those things through, when they start. I think it's later on in life, you actually think about why you want to do things and what's the purpose behind everything. And, because it becomes energy focused and how much energy and family involvement, and you got to weigh up, what do you want to really do? Because you only got so much time limited per week. And then, you got all these different priorities. You got clients, you got staff, and you got family potentially. So it gets quite difficult as you go. And then you're trying to think about the purpose and the visions. Yeah, when you're young at that age, it's just getting on and making sure you got enough money to pay the bills. Now, you've just mentioned that you've finished up. You've just moved on to at this stage onto a company, and you did some amazing things there, and then you decided at some stage to jump back into running your own business again. Can you just go through that at a high level? What your thoughts there? If anything?
Definitely. Well, it's interesting you mentioned about, vision and not really thinking about where you're going to be, but obviously the transition. So the transition really came for me probably a couple of years back. This is when I actively started seeking mentorship. I was already at that point watching, those YouTube videos, watching the people that I thought I'd really inspire to be, and they were inspiring me to do better things with my life beyond just working. Even in a consulting role, I was still managing people and running part of my business, but it wasn't really my own. And two things I really struggled with. One, I always felt like I was pushing other people along rather than or dragging them along with a chain, behind me, and it was a bit of an anchor. There was definitely part of that. But two would be, I went on a thing called Vision Quest. So Rick Cowley runs a thing called Vision Quest, and he's run about 60 or 70 of these things up in Queensland and Bali and various other places. And fundamentally for me, that little retreat, it was a 4 or maybe 5 day retreat, and you go away, there's 12 other people in there with you as well. And I'm not much of a spiritual or God or this sort of person, right? But you, and certainly not a tree hugger type person, I guess you'd say. But ultimately went away on this Vision Quest. And through that journey, basically those 5 days eating vegetarian food and, doing yoga and all this sort of stuff, formed where I saw my life heading. And that ultimately changed the direction. As soon as I left that Vision Quest, I said, I want to build this company. I want to build to this sort of size. And it was quite an ambitious target from where the company that I'd been working at was. It certainly is for the new company I've started now. But ultimately, this is where I wanted to go. This is who I wanted to be able to help. This is how I wanted to be able to do it. And left that Vision Quest sort of with a bit more of an actual direction, a North Star, I guess you'd say. So that was sort of the turning point for me, to be honest.
That's very good. It's interesting. So I do a thing called the preloaded calendar every year with my clients. You'll do that towards November, and that sets us up for the following year. Okay, and it tries to organize us as much as possible. And when I get out of whack, I just everything becomes more of a pressure cooker. And I'm trying to do a lot of different things, and I'm trying to make sure I get the best out of everything I do. So the preloaded calendar approach was taught to me by my coach. And basically it is a way I've been running with it for the last 5-6 years, probably longer now. And it helps me take the pressure off. But one of those things I always do in early February is I do a retreat myself. Okay, I go away on a retreat. And I go away with, the last 2 years have been with my coach, and he's actually in Bali as well. And we do a 3-day event with him on what we want to do. And he's a Kiwi, so don't hold it against him, but he's a hell of a good guy. But I do a day by myself beforehand to set my own expectations, what I want to do, what I want to get out of the 3 days. We do the 3 days with him. And then I spend a day at the end with basically, just trying to work out, of those actions over those 3 days, how to set myself up for the rest of the year and how to execute. And then what I do is I have a few of my clients fly in on the 5th and 6th day, and we do some activities with them. And then I actually fly off there to the team in Philippines to get them set for the year with their objectives and the goals and everything else. And I like that. It just sets me up for the year to be more coordinated and get into a rhythm with the people around me that I work with and the clients I coach with. So I think it's really good thing to take a break like that once a year, to down tools, to think about what the purpose is for the following year. And I really believe in the fact that if you don't have that purpose aligned with you and your personal goals, then it's really, really hard to achieve that. Okay, so it's great to hear that you went on a retreat. I'm a big believer in it, and I think it's something that I should probably get a lot of my clients to come on next year and actually get together and do a retreat. And we at the last retreat, or last couple of times, we did a deep breathing exercise for like an hour and a half, 2-hour session, and it was it really brings you back to the core of what you really want to be, and it's great. So that was fantastic. So that was a Vision Quest. It was a bit of a turning point for you. When was that? A couple of years back?
This would have been a couple of years back. I don't remember exactly the date. It was number 63, whatever the Vision Quest number 63, I think was the number. I think it's probably to 80 now. I don't know what he's up to, but he's done quite a few of these things now. He runs them very well. Everyone comes out of there just with a very clear vision. Everyone's who's have highly recommended it. So I still do, to be brutally honest. But came out of there with a goal, and then ultimately I did end up starting my own company. So I wanted to be a caring leader and really have a solid team behind me and really deliver some good work to customers. So that's ultimately why I started.
Nice. Did you have you talked a bit about those some of the values, I suppose, that you just mentioned there.
Mm.
Did you go through a process to create values? Did you come up with 5 or 6 values, for example, like a lot of people do, and did you come up with a goal and a vision at that
Yeah,
stage?
yeah, definitely. So different people, there's sort of like a big process you went through. So each day you would work on different aspects, and you didn't really know how it would hang together at the end. I don't want to spoil the experience, because if someone wants to do it, I really want them to go in with that, with open eyes, and not understand how the process is going to work. But ultimately, without giving too much away, yes, you did go through the process. Yes, there was some really deep, dark things that you can be confronted with, and that definitely made you really think about things in a certain way. Once you went through that process, you ultimately came out with who you are as a person, but also as a life goal, an overarching life goal, and so forth. And then you did have a bunch of values that you would have aligned with your vision.
Great.
Ultimately, it
Great.
chokes me up almost thinking about it. So
Yeah, good. It's good. It's got to be like
deep.
that. It's got to be that emotional. It's got to be that tied to that emotional inner self-belief, because that's what's going to keep you driving forward. At the end of the day,
Definitely.
running an IT services business like yours, which I've done in the past, is very difficult. It's not easy. It goes up and down all day long, and it's a bit of a roller coaster. That is emotional itself. So you've got to have that inner drive, the belief that keeps you motivated, keeps you going. Otherwise, you will give in at some point.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree on that, to be honest.
Good.
You've got to be very, very much a believer in yourself.
Yeah,
That you can do it before anyone else will.
for sure. Now let's talk about how you got your first client, because one of the things people do, I mean, you can reference back to when you were contracting right at the beginning, when you're at Sigma leaving, on the 5th day. But one of the concerns a lot of people do when they want to go and start an IT services business like you've done is, how do I get my first client? Ian, I get that question all the time. Or how do I go from, a full-time job to a contracting stroke consultancy firm? So how did you get your first client?
Yeah. It's, to be honest, it's probably more just talking to people. I really feel like in this in the services space, trust is probably the hardest thing you've got to overcome. And as a technical person, many technical people aren't really good or don't want to speak to people. They want to work on the tech. They want to just work on the new technology, the shiny toy. But you've really got to understand the business problems and be able to talk to people. Like I'm quite like walking into a room and 30 people, I guess you say I'm extroverted, because I do like to go and speak to all those 30 people if they're there, and try to have a bit of a yarn with them, and just, see what they're all about, right? And make new connections. And other people, I guess, if you're a bit more introverted, I could imagine that being a lot harder if you don't really feel good about being in a bigger place with people and so forth. But I'd say referrals and really, the more you speak to people, the more you start to form relationships. And then over time, those relationships, I've had people come back 20 years later when I've posted on LinkedIn and put a little thumbs up on a post that I might have put, and I re-engage and connect with that person again. It's something that you wouldn't have expected for such a long difference in gap. And I guess the expectation for me is not to think that everyone's going to be a customer either. Like every time I meet people, there may be some things that I can help with, and you just give the information for free, and you try and help them as much as possible. At some point, that, I guess, that karma, I guess you'd say, comes back to me. So I guess that's probably how I've done it. I'm not saying it's the best way, and there's certainly there's paid avenues and so forth. I think you need to supplement a few of these things together. But I'd say probably if you're a technical person, then I'd probably say get comfortable talking to people, and get comfortable that you're going to be doing an abnormal amount of work probably than you used to, just picking up the phone, talking to people, making conversations, making connections. And that's going to be 20, 30, 40% of your day, particularly early on, maybe even more,
For sure.
if you're doing a really good job at it, until the point where you can start doing the delivery side of things and, help have other people that are probably maybe even better than you are to make those calls. But early on, that was certainly my approach.
Yeah. No, look, it's amazing points there. You have to put the effort into it. You have to pick up the phone. You have to have conversations. And as you said, you have to build trust. Otherwise, no one's going to buy from you, because people buy from people, in the services worlds. The people are, and your team are your product. So, and what I always hear when I talk to people, I say, look, if you try and you made that point there, you can't be so pushy that every person you talk to has to buy from you, because people have to go through their own process themselves to actually buy from you as well. And their process sometimes is like as basic as this is, hey, I've got to trust, Matthew and his team to come on into my division at this company where I'm employed, and they've got to deliver something, and I'm held accountable on how they deliver. Because if they fail, then I fail, and then I'm impacted. And I think a lot of people don't even think about that. And I think it's like, it is that basic. People are worried about their jobs sometimes. So they've got to make sure they hire the right person and make sure that person has the same values as what they have as well. Otherwise, they don't feel comfortable in hiring it. And when you actually do have a conversation with people, it's a mirror image. You're having a conversation with someone and they're back and forth. You thinking, they thinking, and they're reflecting on exactly what you thinking and talking about at the same time. So it's really, really important, Matthew, as you said, is to learn those skills of holding a conversation, knowing when to pause, when to ask the right questions. So yeah, that's a really good thing. Anything on that you can think of is there a book or something that you've read or any collateral that you've seen that could actually help someone that is a technical focused person to talk more and ask the right questions?
Mate, great question. I've read so many books now; it's not funny. I've forgotten which book gave me what information, to be brutally honest. But I quite like Alex Hormozy, to be honest. I like his straightforward approach to sales and marketing and conversation. But I think it depends on what your weaknesses are, to be honest. Like, if you're someone who has very weak language, and what I mean by that, a lot of IT people, they're very technical, and because they're experts already, they kind of know all the problems that can occur. But because they know the problems, they don't want to be as committed to the outcome, or they don't want to give the impression that, hey, this is going to take 6 weeks. They want to go, I think it's going to be about 6 weeks. They're quite unsure of themselves. And I guess as an expert, what they sort of fail to realize is that if you come across as the expert, or you're meant to be the expert, but you're giving me this fuzzy sort of language that I think it might be this long, that doesn't give a really strong impression to a business owner that you actually really know what you're talking about. Even though you're probably the best person in that industry, you'd be better off just saying it's going to take 6 weeks.
Yep.
Rather than saying, I believe it's going to take that weak language can be a real barrier for a lot of technical people. Sure. That's probably some tips.
Great. So you're saying there, for example, the confusion or not explaining to the client in layman's terms so they understand exactly what they need to understand so they can make the decision, basically.
Yeah, but also being very certain of the outcome. Like if you're the expert and you want someone to lead you in that journey, leaders tend to have a certainty about them that you're going to follow them. You're going to have a certainty of outcome. If you're talking to a business leader and you're sort of being wishy-washy about things, wishy-washy about timeframes and outcomes, as you said before, they're risking their career potentially to go with you, particularly if they've never worked with you before and they haven't been recommended. That there's a massive risk there. So you better be certain that you can deliver that outcome. And so therefore the language and the certainty and the way you present yourself can make a massive difference just on that one thing alone,
Yeah. That's good. It's good to get that clarity on that. All right. So you've done your first client and we talked a bit about, the communication and some of the things that some people that start those consultancy firms, IT services generally are fairly technical people because that's what they've been doing for a long time. And they've got to have the business acumen. And I think that's really important. What were the biggest challenges you've had starting your business at the early stages of your business?
Yeah, that is a great question.
Yeah.
Be knowing what to work on at any given time. There's so many things you can be doing. There's so many things that, you need to do today to bring cash in the door. You need to better work on how does your messaging and your servicing need to work. You need to work on marketing and sales. You kind of have to work on 15 different things at the same time and trying to pick the one that has the most leverage of your time and effort and resource that you have. If you're VC funded, as an example, you're going to have a very different approach to sales and marketing than if you're completely bootstrapped and you're by yourself. It's a completely different ballpark, right? So understanding what you can do with the resources you have and whether your time is best spent is probably the single biggest challenge, getting things off the ground. Because it's just, you can do everything and there's so many things to do. You could be wasting a lot of time.
Yeah.
I'd probably say that one.
Yeah.
And then starting to trust experts in those other areas. So, for example, most technical staff or most technical people, I should say, aren't necessarily the best salespeople, aren't necessarily the best, commercial guys, they're not going to necessarily write the best contract. So you got to lean on expertise really. And if they ask you to do something, you probably should go and at least attempt it once, twice, 3 times before you reject that as the way to do something, that's what I think anyway.
No, it's good. It's good. Some really good points there. And I suppose as you grow your team and everything else, those are the things that you've got to basically, grow out. Otherwise you don't have a team and you can't leverage. And one of the biggest things as a business owner is you've got to be able to leverage correctly, and people and software and tools and all those things are really good. And then going back to the first point you mentioned there is about the focus. You only have the energy and the time to execute on so much. What is the right thing, the right next thing, RNT as I call it? What's the right next thing to actually execute? And when I talk to clients myself in the coaching sessions, I go like, doing this great, that's great. But like, what's the right next thing for you actually at this point in time? That's what you should do. Nothing else, because the chances of actually executing, is on all those things is quite difficult. Let's be honest. So I think it's important. People want to be able to go forward the whole time, Matt. It's interesting because the momentum is key. Momentum in your business is one of the most satisfying things for a business owner is when things are positive and they're going in the right direction. But sometimes if you've got too many things happening, you actually don't know what direction to go in, and then you don't get that momentum to go forward. And then basically you can't pat yourself on the back and say to yourself, hey, I've done a great job this month or this last couple of weeks. And often when I speak to clients, I say, hey, how's your week gone? Honestly, give me a view out of 10. And they go like, I can't even give you out of 10. It's just been a freaking blur, you know what I mean, of things to go through. And I can't actually know what I've even done at the end of the week. And that's a bit of a concern, you know what I mean, to be honest, because you got to have that self-gratification. And one of the big tips, what I used to do when I had 115 people working for me back in the consulting days, is we would run a weekly channel. Okay. And it was Slack in those days. Teams wasn't around. And we would actually put in all the objectives that we wanted to achieve for the week on like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And anything we did, we just put those objectives in there. And then at the end of the week, we would have someone just to go through quickly and say, or have a team meeting. Well, we did that. And then what I would do for myself is I have a thing that's automated. It would send it to me on Saturday morning, like at 9 o'clock or 8:30. And I'd wake up in the morning and the first thing I'd do is say hi to my wife. And then I'd just look straight away at 8:30. And on a Saturday, I go, look at all these things the teams have actually achieved. And as the team grew and got bigger, we could leverage more and they could do more things internal. And that list just went longer and longer. And I just look at this and go, wow, we're a weapon. Unstoppable. Look at these things we're doing. I'll just be pumped for the whole weekend.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. There's a little tip for you, Matt, is to probably have a sense check every week, see what you have actually achieved, to pat yourself on the back, and then you can review that the next day on Saturday and give you some energy for you and the kids, and it'll be a good thing to do. So just think about that.
I actually really like that. I'm going to take you up on that offer. One thing I do feel I do quite well of is actually then taking people's advice and actually actioning it quite quickly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put that into the business this week for sure. Probably today if I get the time this evening and get it ready and set up so we can actually have a real good win. Because I think that's something that's missed, right? You feel like you've got all this outstanding stuff, but if you keep not thinking how you've achieved anything, you're just going to get yourself into a dark
definitely, because it's human nature. You just think about all the negative things first up generally. You're like, oh, what have I got to do next week? Oh, and you go, oh my gosh, look, we haven't done much. And before you know it, you're really upset with yourself and you put yourself in a negative frame rather than having a look at what we actually achieved. And you go, wow, that's amazing. And then that powers you through to the next week. So that's it's a bit of a mind trick, but it's brilliant. I do it to this day. So, all right. So we moved on from your first client and you spoke a bit about that, and that was awesome. Can you sort of mention to us what type of client that you actually did, and what did you do? Like a virtual case study or a case study? Don't have to mention names because we don't want to mention names or industry, but can you give us an idea of what a project looks like maybe for you currently?
Yeah. No, great. I think there's been a few. There's actually been a few now, different customers.
Yeah.
And I think what I might do is give you a more recent one because I think it's going to be a good story there, a use case. They're a financial institution. They work with various platforms, and they're basically a rewards platform that can actually do B2B sales, or you can pay for your BAS and your payroll and things through that platform, and ultimately get points for your business. as an example from
Nice.
doing that. And typically you wouldn't normally be able to do that. And these guys, there's obviously some small fees involved in that, but obviously it means that you can go and get rewarded for your business transactions, basically.
Right.
And in that business, they've grown very, very fast over the last few years. And one of the things that they do is they have obviously marketing like everyone else, but it's not really targeted. It's not well targeted. It's not personalized to the individual's business and hobbies, but the interests of the actual leadership and what they actually might spend their money on. So during that engagement, we've actually used AI. And this particular, because you're talking about banking transactions, it's got to be very secure, very safe, very repeatable. So we've actually used offline AI models to categorize data, to help build a personalization engine that we can actually use in platform to target people with to burn down those points, to earn the points, to give people incentive to keep using the platform, but ultimately personalize their own environment for those transactions. So the good thing about that is, whilst it's been a very technical AI back end, very secure sort of implementation, it's the actual impact has been a very real, tangible front end personalization process out of it, as an example. So that's one use case.
Yeah. How long did it take to put that together? I mean, you obviously did a strategy. Can you go through the process to actually get that done?
Yeah. So I've been part of an innovation team, I guess you'd say, or a team that's sort of skunkworks type implementation, but that's been very much a product led. We need to have these particular problems. How can we solve these business cases? How do we get more users involved? How do we actually make them want to earn more points and continue using the platform? How do you actually make them want to use those points? Because obviously it's a liability on the balance sheet for that company until they've actually used them. So really thought through that and said, well, look, one thing that the big thing that's missing here as an experiment, I guess, is personalization. So it was more of a experiment hypothesis type in scenario, and then being involved in that sort of small team to help deliver that outcome.
Great.
That was how that particular one started. There's others that are far more strategic, like we're doing a transformation project. That's more a bigger journey. You're talking about 3 months type planning processes and so forth before you get into execution. Those tend to be a little bit bigger. We've now got a whole bunch of templates and frameworks that we've developed throughout that engagement to better reuse and deploy at other companies.
Yeah.
A lot of that's also I've done in the past has been in my head, but now I'm actually productizing.
Great.
Probably taking some of your advice there, to be brutally honest.
No,
taking some of that collateral that I've had in my head for so long, all those years of consulting, and actually building productized offerings that we can go, okay, this is a repeatable process. This is something that's, yes, the questions might need to be specific for that industry or that customer, but the overarching way you deliver it, the program of works, the way you interact with the customer, the way that they have to then take things on board, that's all being developed.
Good. Good. That's good. I mean, it's great that, we've been talking about this on our coaching sessions about productizing your offer and making sure you get a better outcome for clients. And that's what, that's what you want, and less stress on the team to do it, So I think consulting is in a big shakeup globally at the moment, as we know. I talk to people in the US and in the UK and Europe and in Australia, and where I'm based, for those people listening. The consulting environment is under a sort of a threat at the moment with those AI solutions out there. And unfortunately, big companies do not want to have big consultancy fees any longer. And they want to be able to make sure they get solutions out to their customer base at a cheaper price point and faster. So I think over the next 2 to 3 years, the consultancy firms that will survive and actually do well in this murky, 2 to 3 year period will be the ones that can leverage as much as possible with AI, with their IP and their methods, and then execute that at speed and give clients a better outcome. Clients will never, ever be able to do what consultants can do. And the reason why is, and I say this all the time to people, Matt, is, for example, how many projects have you ever worked on, Matt, since including Sigma days, right at the beginning? How many sort of AI, not AI, BI projects or analytic projects have you worked on, you reckon?
Hundreds, mate. I've done 6 different merger and acquisition, leading data integration projects, like big ones, where basically a whole section of a company gets carved off and moved away. So probably 6 of those, hundreds and hundreds of analytics, integration projects, transformation projects. So I agree with you. When I've seen output from an AI, GPT core, doesn't matter which one you really use, there's a level of when you first read it, you go, wow, this is amazing. But then if you're actually good at what you do and you start reading it, like this is missing, that
Yeah.
isn't really quite refined very well. How is that going to be physically implemented at a customer? Like, how are they going to take what these words are? The change management alone in the process is probably 2/3 of the problem. Getting people to change a business process where their job is going to be that's a very difficult thing, and that's the thing that AI doesn't solve. It doesn't solve the change management and the thought process around how you're going to actually make it a reality in a business.
For sure. I was just doing some research with on BCG, some consulting group, and they were just talking a bit about 70% of an AI project is basically change management, education, it's all that fluffy stuff, as we used to say in the IT world, and only 30% of it's the technical side. Okay, and it just goes to show, and I think the 70% is hell of important in this era, because when I did the mass ERP implementations way back in the day, I'm talking about in 2000, 99 and 2000s, showing my age, 25, 26 years ago, is you would have maybe in a multinational company in Europe, about 300 people doing AR and AP, accounts receivable, accounts payable. And then as we rolled out SAP, ERP environment, into those areas, they'll go from 300 something down to like 35 people over a period of a month. And then that 35 will go down to 12. Okay. And we went through this, and that was from basically paper-based process to actually into a systemized automated system at some point. And that process took so long because those people would have to be found new jobs. Where could they be cross-trained? What can they do? There's a whole lot of energy that had to be spent around that. And then after that sort of early 2000s, after the big companies went through the ERP implementations, that change management fell away quite a bit, right? Because everything became sort of an upgrade. The processes were already there. The process, you might have switched a new system on versus take it, or upgrade it. But really the same core team would still be there. And they knew the process anyway. It might be better, faster. There might be a whole lot of new bells and whistles to it. But fundamentally, the process had changed from paper-based to an ERP platform. And there was a big change. Now, I see that change going to happen again, but I don't think people are going to be putting that effort into the change management because they're not used to spending that time and effort on change management. So I think it's a big part. I think you're right. All the research so far over the last year and a half is showing that. So yeah, I think you need to think about that yourself, even in your implementations.
Yeah, that's certainly. So I hadn't actually heard those stats, by the way, but that's an area where I'm really seeing it in the market, but also definitely pay a lot of attention to.
Yeah,
and I feel like the change management, the uptake, BI projects have traditionally suffered a lot from uptake issues, right? Where you go and build these tools. Doesn't matter what tool it is, Cognos, Power BI, Tableau, Click. It's irrelevant. Ultimately, you build these dashboards. People don't really take ownership of them because they see it's a black box. They can't touch it. They can't feel it. Can't edit it, and they don't then ultimately own it at the end of the day. So I've been acutely aware because of these sort of analytics BI projects that uptake and therefore change management was a big part of something you need to focus on. And I've tried to pay a lot of attention to that over the years, and I do. I think it's accelerating with AI.
Yeah.
And if anything, people are, I want to say, not lying, but they're definitely not being as forthcoming about changing information or processes because it hasn't. They potentially could be losing jobs over this, or the job could be transformed, or at least, or they're worried about the job being lost in today's market. Now, the reality is, if they're a good company, good people are going to get reallocated and retrained and do better things with the time than just AR processing, as an example, right? I mean, you can do ACR and things like that these days that can do 95% of that quite accurately, but maybe even higher. But it's definitely an area of concern for a lot of people. And that's actually where I think some of the challenges are. So there's sort of, in AI, two challenges that I see. One is management and boards want the technology in a solution, in SaaS, in their environment, and so forth. But not many people know how to actually implement it in a real life. What is it we're implementing? How are we going to leverage it? That's the biggest challenge. And the other one is, I'm so afraid of AI, I don't want to use it, or I want to be very resistant to it and fight all the initiatives and make sure they fail so that I don't get threatened. It's all the two things I'm seeing in the market at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, look, it's going to be interesting. I mean, the smaller consultancy firms have jumped on the board of the AI and they want to get involved in it because they know that it's an opportunity to scale their business. And the bigger consultancy firms, like the big offshore and the big, multinational consultancy firms, they stuck because they've got this body of people where they potentially don't need 20 to 30% of them over the next 2 years. So what do they do with that team of people? And I know that there are certain places in Europe and even in India that the graduates from some of the best universities are not even being picked up at the moment. And the first time in, 5 years or 10 years that they haven't been picked up because of the fact that people are worried, do we need these graduates coming through into these consultancy firms? So it's interesting. But let's go back to where and how you think you're going to scale your business. So we talked about productizing your offer. I'm a big believer that's going to help you scale. And I know that that's something that you want to think about. But let's just talk about, are you going to use AI, or what tools or what ways are you going to use to actually, get that scaling happening?
Yeah. So originally when I first started the company, I thought I'm probably going to need 30, 100, 150 people. There's going to be a progression of bodies. I'm feeling like there's probably less of that. I mean, I'm still going to need a number of people to help leverage time and effort and so forth. And I think AI is going to be a big proponent of that. Automating ultimately the business processes that we create, that's probably our unique proposition. We're going to go out to market in a particular way, service a customer in a particular way, just like every other customer or consultancy out there or agency out there will do that, right? They'll have certain processes. Some require very expertise or very high levels of expertise to deliver those, and that's traditionally probably where I've lived, where I haven't had great documented processes where there've been things that a team of 20-year-old veterans have sort of tackled the projects. Therefore, we've worked very closely together and so forth, but not well productized. And I think actually the shift for me right now is productizing that, using AI to help automate the things that would be very time consuming for me to deliver, and then spending like the last 10-20% refining what the AI has helped generate to help deliver the content and outcomes to clients.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Some people, that I've been working with, we've been helping them set up teams in offshore land. And I know a lot of clients have teams in, India, Pakistan, Philippines, AL, Kuala Lumpur, and Indonesia, because they are really at a right price point. It's going to be a bit of a challenge between people setting up those teams and, really thinking about, do we need to, if we've got an AI solution that can do parts of the job and have less of them, because in Australia, the challenge in the small business in Australia is the cost of people. It's too expensive because companies don't want to pay for it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so you're stuck between a hard place, and it's a really hard thing because you want to hire people in your own country all the time as your first point of call. But if the customer won't pay for it, then what do you do? I think
that's the real challenge.
I think it's a challenge, globally, like in America. I don't know if you saw the H-1B1, whatever visa that changed. That's going to impact a lot of people over the globe, and they're having those sort of discussions now in Europe as well. So it's quite going from a globalized IT work remote scenario to help any company to, I think is going to be a bit of a clash between that expectation for customers regarding AI and the mix and how the IT consulting services companies actually change their model. It's going to be very interesting to see that over the next 2 to 3 years. I'm actually looking forward to see how it all plays out, to be honest.
Yeah, this could have some real impacts in the industry, right? Because I guess like that restriction of the trade, I guess in a lot of ways, for big companies, that's millions of dollars that have just been added to the bottom line in terms of the expense line, I should say, taking off that bottom line because of the H-1B visa changes in the US. Now, with that, I guess you could argue then that the local economy might pick up some of that slack, and some of the people that might be missing out on opportunities might take that up.
Yeah.
Or it can just drive, pricing straight sky high because it's so little competition, and therefore it's very hard to get resourcing. Or you have to pay the big premium for the H-1B visa.
Yeah.
To be used. So I think you're right. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. The globalization of IT, I agree. We're seeing at a global scale a lot of self-workforce, like going back into a decentralized approach decentralized approach for each economy, sort of trying to stand on their own 2 feet a bit more rather than having a reliance on external parties. And that's definitely, I think, going to play a big role over the next 3, 4, 5 years. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, going to be very interesting to see what happens. Now, one of the questions that I always, I like to ask, because I think it's hell of important, is do you have any strategies in the past? It doesn't have to be current. It could be in the past that you've worked with, how to attract or to retain sort of clients. Have you gone, we spoke about, you got to pick up the phone, have a conversation without that, but how do you attract and how do you retain clients? Have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think I'll probably start the retaining. The retaining for me is all about making sure that the customer is ultimately happy. But I think when you do a bad job, you'll get a little bit of negative feedback, but often customers vote with their wallet. They vote by you not having any more projects or them not renewing contracts. And that's really where you'll find out whether you've done a bad job. And unfortunately, at that point, it's too late in most cases.
Yeah.
So for me, constantly being engaged with the customer, constantly, taking the temperature, making sure you've done a good job, but also delivering. When you say you're going to deliver something, make sure you deliver it. Don't be 10, 20, 30% over budget, 10, 20, 30% over time, because that's a bad outcome for the customer. They thought they were getting something for $10,000 and it ended up costing them 15 or 20 and 3 extra weeks. That's not a good experience. So I think for retention is actually delivering on what you said you're going to do.
Yep.
Personally, I think that's the biggest outcome.
Yeah.
And making sure that the customer's ultimately happy. And you've also, in a lot of consultancies, I've seen it time and time again, documentation for the customer. Like, how are they going to hand it over if you aren't there at some point? That they don't want to rely on an external party. You've got to make sure you've done the documentation right as well, and that they can understand it and manage it and do something without you. Because then, as you enable them, that gives you the opportunity to work on the next thing the initiative that they want you to work on. Otherwise, you're going to be maintaining the same old rubbish, and at some point that doesn't. I'm not saying it's rubbish, but the same old technology that ultimately will become a block in the future, and ultimately be replaced by something else. So you need to be able to be very good to your customers.
Yeah.
In terms of attraction, building that trust, I think you've just got to engage with customers. You've also got to be constantly learning, because the industry changes so much that if you haven't learned, I found it particularly in the AI space, a lot of customers are very well educated in the space. They understand what RAG means. They understand what an MCP means. Things like terms that, typically most in the past, technologists would say these 3-letter acronyms, which I really don't like. I prefer to use the full terms, right? But I used a couple there myself just now. But ultimately, we'd use these terms, make ourselves feel smarter and so forth. But ultimately, the customer wouldn't go really research them very much. Now, with AI, the customers are researching really and deeply. They're actually really excited by the technology. So, yeah, you're going to have to go a lot deeper than you've ever had before.
Yeah.
To make sure your knowledge is on point.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Plus, they can, ChatGPT it, and they can get an idea of what they should use or shouldn't use, and then that accelerates their learning to have a real good discussion with the services provided like yours. So, yeah, I think it's going to have a lot more discussions, and I think having those honest discussions with those people becomes more of a focus point because of GPT. I know a client of mine had dinner with them a couple of weeks back. They were doing a strategy for a big company, global company, and they said, they've reviewed it with ChatGPT and these are all the things. So they had to go back in and explain to them that ChatGPT has some valid points on their strategy, but at the end of the day, it's missing a whole lot of other information that it didn't know, or the context around it did not give it enough information. So it was trying to re-educate the customer to the point where, they were actually right and their strategy they put forward actually is correct. Okay. So it's quite interesting. Lucky the client at that stage spoke to my client and said, look, we have used GPT and we have done this and have done that. So they actually could re-educate the customer on that. And I think that's going to be really interesting, because every time you put a strategy now onto a client, the first thing they're going to do is probably not allowed to, because, it's not even sanctioned internally, is to put your strategy straight through their GPT and say, well, give me the 20 things we should know and where the pitfalls are and where the cost is. And they're going to start to try and analyze your strategy document. And a lot of that information, as we know, is not really correct. Or a lot of assumptions. It makes a lot of assumptions. And I was talking to an AI leader about 2 weeks ago, and he says about the hallucinations. It's pretty interesting that the hallucinations are really around, it's like every time you put something into a prompt, into an LLM, it's asking them to do a test.
Yeah.
And sometimes what actually happens, like any test, is, imagine us back in high school, HSC, writing HSC this year, and you get 70% of it, the gist of the question, and you've got a multiple choice, and you try and work through, and you sort of got to knock down to 2 or 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5. And then you go, all right, I've just got to take a bit of a guess. And I think it's an educated guess. It's on that. And that's exactly what the prompt behavior is doing. It's actually, you're putting a test question to the LLM, the ChatGPT, for example, and their answer coming back is the answer that it's trying to deliver through that question. And it will make assumptions every now and then. And that's when people look at it and go, who have got the depth and knowledge, who are subject matter experts, will look at it and go, geez, that is totally incorrect. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then say, oh, that's a hallucination and a loose face. So it's going to be really interesting through that process. Really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot in the coding space, a lot of the strategy space. I've asked a lot of questions around governance and things like that. And when you ask the question because you know what the answer should be, you can ask the question in a way because to make sure that you get the answer that you want, and it just helps you generate the content better. But when you're asking things in a way that legal or contracts and so forth, I've seen people trying to generate some things around that space and ultimately not get anywhere close to what a lawyer would actually require for that. I had some business partners that generated some contracts and they ultimately use Mr. Claude and it didn't turn out too well in the end, and they had to go out to some lawyers and really get the expertise there. I've seen the same thing with code. The first one that spits out code, it could be like a script rather than a fully fledged class and functions, and really done in a way that doesn't have API secrets and so forth in the code. And the separation of logic. When you know what you're looking for, you can say, "Oh, actually, fix this, do this." But if you don't know what you're looking for, you can actually get some pretty average solutions out of it too.
So just give it a quick plug about your business, Datalink. What services are you currently doing, Matt?
Yeah, so we'd probably do 3 things in the data space. So we've got I guess you said advisory and training, which covers things like data strategy and architecture, and governance. The next one is we look at the building of the products as well. So your data lakes, your data warehouses, to data integration, and then obviously the visualization of that as well. So you got your analytics, your visualization tools, and so forth. So there's probably a 3-part data services offering, and then we also look at AI and embedding in that in a business process. So really focused on the business outcomes and physically making the changes like we spoke about before around change management, owning the solution end to end, and actually making it real world use cases in the AI, not just like a chatbot or some sort of repository, but actually making a fundamental business process change.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. So thanks for that sharing the services. What we're going to do is going to come back to you in a bit of, and maybe in a year's time or whatever it is, see how the journey of Datalink is going. And we'd love to hear how you're building your team and what does it look like now with AI, and innovation that you're currently doing around building your company out more and more and servicing those clients of yours. So really keen to get you back on the podcast at some stage, and then talk about your future and your vision and how that's changing as well. And it'll be awesome to get you back. So thanks very much for having you on the show today. And I know you're hell of a busy. Appreciate every moment that we get from you. Thanks, Matt.
No, not a problem, Ian. It's just been I love the chat, to be honest. So
brilliant. Thanks, Todd. Bye.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks for joining us on IT Mastermind Talks. Don't miss out on our next episode. Hit the follow button and stay updated. Want to be our next podcast guest? Contact us and share your expertise with our audience. Visit www.itmastermindtalks.com for more information.